Greetings from Acworth United Methodist Church. I hope this finds you all doing well today. So this week I wanted to share a brief devotion from the book of Amos, the prophet Amos. I'm in chapter 6. I'm going to read verse 1 and then I'm going to read verses 3 through 7. So Amos chapter 6, it says, "Woe to you who are complacent in Zion, and to you who feel secure on Mount Samaria, you notable men of the foremost nation, to whom the people of Israel come." Verse 3, it says, "You put off the day of disaster. You bring near a reign of terror, and you lie on beds adorned with ivory. You lounge on your couches. You dine on choice lambs and fattened calves. You strum away on your harps like David and improvise on musical instruments. You drink wine by the bowlful, and you use the finest lotions, but you do not grieve over the ruin of Joseph. Therefore you will be among the first to go into exile. Your feasting and lounging will end." Now this is a very interesting passage, kind of a warning that we have from the prophet Amos. Amos he's talking to the Israelites. He's talking especially to those who are, the most comfortable, the leaders, I guess, of the society. And he's speaking in the days before the Babylonian exile, when the nation of Babylon would come to the Israelites, would take over the Israelites, and many of them would be carried off into Babylon in exile. And the prophet references this coming exile there in verse 7. But I want to highlight today a few of the points that Amos makes here as he's bringing this warning to the Israelites to see how this prophecy might be relevant for us today. So we see there first in verse 1. Amos says, "Woe to you who are complacent, to you who feel secure on Mount Samaria." Now, the original term for that word complacent, there it also means to be at ease or to be undisturbed. All right, so the Israelites, this group, they had sort of formed this world for themselves, that within this world, they could really go through their days and not be disturbed or bothered by the suffering and the injustice that was really going on in the lives of their brothers and sisters all around them. Right? And so they had kind of formed this world for themselves where they had become complacent. And so Amos goes on to describe some of the activities of the Israelites, which really it helped to kind of keep their minds occupied, but it also fed into this complacency. Now, some of these activities may seem a little strange to us, but let's look about into these things a little bit and try to consider a little bit how they may look today. So, for example, Amos mentions that the people were lounging on their couches. Right now, when I think about that, I think about the time that I spend lounging around, maybe in front of my television or with my smartphone in my hand, like in front of my face. He also says that the people were lying on their beds, and he says they were beds adorned with ivory. Now, this is interesting. The folks were spending a lot of their time and resources on decorating and then redecorating their homes, their bedrooms, their kitchens. And I think we can sort of see this same tendency in our society today. Now we're not talking about good, basic, maintenance and care for our homes. Amos is talking about this tendency to turn one's focus almost entirely onto their home, keeping up with latest trends and fashions, even in home decor, so that it can kind of consumes a person's attention. Amos says also that the Israelites, they kept themselves entertained by strumming away on their harps like David. And that makes me think about the amount of time that I can spend keeping myself entertained with sports, or travel or shows. I think it's easy to see some parallels there. And then finally, Amos says the people use the finest lotions. So the folks, they were chasing after their vanity, right? They were very concerned about their outward appearance, and they were giving a lot of their resources and their time to making sure that their outward appearance and their hygiene even was really keeping up with trends. And so then we get to what Amos says there in verse 6. He says, "You drink wine by the bowlful, you use the finest lotions." He says, "But you do not grieve over the ruin of Joseph." Okay, now this is the big issue. This is the point that Amos is raising. He's saying that the people that were allowing their focus to be so occupied with their own selves, right? Their own entertainment, their own hygiene, their own home decor. And they were so consumed by this world that they'd kind of built around themselves, they'd become oblivious to the suffering and the destruction that was really happening all around them. And if they were exposed to these sufferings and these injustices, then the people, as quickly as they could, they would want to go back to their world, their entertainment, and their harps and their cosmetics, right? So then we see finally in verse 7, God says to the people through Amos, he says, "Therefore, you will be among the first to go into exile. Your feasting and your lounging will end." All right, so this is an interesting passage, and my first question to consider on this passage is why? Like, why would God take the people out of their comfort, out of their complacency? Why would he take away their distractions so they would be forced to see and to grieve and to hurt over the suffering that their brothers and sisters were experiencing? Why does God call us to discard our luxuries, to discard our distractions so that we can better see the people who are hurting, our brothers and sisters who are hurting all around us? Now we get the same question when we read the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10. Remember, there was a man lying on the side of the road. He was stripped, he was beaten, left for dead. And the priest and the Levite, they came down the road, they passed by this man, and they may have seen him, and they may have kind of shaken their heads. They may have even quietly prayed, God, have mercy on this man. But then they both turned and looked the other way, right? They quickly returned back to the distractions of their own lives, their own world that they'd kind of built around themselves. Maybe the man smelled bad. Maybe they were afraid they would become sick or dirty. Maybe the sight of him and the injustice, the suffering that he was experiencing, maybe it brought more pain for them than they were really willing to carry. So they just chose to kind of look away in order to protect themselves. Maybe that's what's going on there. But in any case, we know that then the Samaritan comes along. And for whatever reason, the Samaritan was willing to not only see this man suffering, but to get involved, to walk with this smelly, broken man. He wasn't afraid. The Samaritan was not afraid to hurt and to grieve with this man lying on the side of the road. He wasn't afraid of the pain or the inconvenience that might come from becoming involved in this person's life. And so we remember what compelled Christ to share this parable of the Good Samaritan. Remember, just before this, he had asked the man, he said, "What is the law?" And this man had said, "Well, the law says we are to love the Lord our God with all our heart, all our soul, all our strength, all our mind, and we are to love our neighbor as we love ourselves." Okay? The law of God has never changed. God's word never changes. This has always been the calling for God's children. He still says, love me with all your heart, your soul, your strength, and your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that the point of this passage in Amos is that when we are consumed with our luxuries, our distractions, our entertainment, our comforts, our home decor, the latest trends, when we allow those things to consume us and to form our world, then it becomes impossible for us to truly see and to love our neighbor, particularly in the way that God calls us to love our neighbor. And I think in this season, all of us can kind of relate to this idea that Amos expresses here, this idea of being taken into exile, taken away, cut off from friends and family, and that our feasting and our lounging, in many ways, that's been cut off in this season. And it feels like a lot of our distractions and those things that bring us comfort and that form our world, a lot of those things have been removed, and we're kind of cut off from one another a bit. And so in this season, I want us to try to be encouraged. Let's hear the word of the prophet Amos. Let's remember what are the reasons that the Lord cuts us off and cuts his people off from the distractions and off from the luxuries. Why would he allow us to go into this time where we're better able to focus on some of the hurt and the suffering that may be happening all around us, that is happening all around us in our society? Let's ask him to show us why we're so hesitant to look at our brothers and sisters who are hurting, who are suffering, why we're so hesitant to get involved in their place of hurt and suffering. Like, are we afraid for our own safety? Maybe we're afraid that the pain of the grief and the injustice will be more than we can bear, But then let's ask him to renew in our lives his call to love. This has always been his call, to love him with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Remember, Christ said, that which you have done to the least of these, so have you done unto me. And so if he's removing some of these distractions from your life in this season, ask him to open your eyes. Let's all ask him to open our eyes anew so that we can, again, truly see our neighbor, to be involved with our neighbor, to get involved with them in their places of hurt and suffering. Let's ask him to give us courage, wisdom, not only to see them, but to know them, to serve them, and to love them as he calls us to love and as he loves us. To the glory of his name. I hope you are all well this week. Please let us know if there's anything we can do to serve. Blessings to you all today.